Citezen Band Radio, the effectiveness of simplicity and channels over frequencies. On the trail radio here, this is definitely going to be something different than I usually do. I usually do 1 to 3 minute clips, and bear with me, I wrote the script in about 2 hours and I'm using an online teleprompter. And so anyway, this video is a couple of things. One, it is me explaining why the concept of channelized frequencies is better for emergencies, general talk, and calling out for QSOs. Secondly, this will also go over why amateur radio is better for experimenting with, like the hobby was originally for. And thirdly, it'll serve as a thought process behind different citizen band radios, for example, GMRS and CB. Obviously, there are more than 2 different bands that you don't need a license for, but these will be the main 2 that I'll be referencing. And finally, I'll be explaining why I think personally there should be a sector for HF license-free radio channelized into more than just CB, mainly a sector for 20 meter and 40 meter. So, as I get into that, I'm going to go ahead and talk about why channelized frequencies are simpler than frequency ranges. So there you are. Obviously, listening to this video, you enjoy some aspect of radios. You know there's not actually such thing as channels and that they're all just frequencies assigned to arbitrary numbers. You tell your family, go to their VFO mode, enter in 462.575 megahertz with a CT-CSS tone of 103.5 hertz. You tell them there no offset is necessary and you'll be on the GMRS spectrum, so there's no worry about interference. They look at you with a bored, worried look, not knowing what you just said. Wouldn't it have been so much easier just to say, go to channel 16. You press up on the radio until it's on the right channel. Of course it would have. Frequency ranges make sense for ham radio only because there's so many repeaters with different access tones that it's necessary to keep the bandwidth low. But the way I see it, there is such thing as too many repeaters, too many channels, and frankly, too many frequencies. It's funny to me that a service all about making contacts and speaking to people in a friendly, sociable manner has so few people talking on it. Part of that has to do with the hobby dying out, but another part has to do with the fact that when you give 100 people 100 different choices, there will be pockets of people in places. Some frequencies die on a lack of transmission, while some few people are talking on it, but ultimately, people will be so spread out that no one talks. If we took the same 100 people and gave them 10 choices, we would see almost all 10 of those choices being used. Some more than others, sure, but all used nonetheless. If there were 5 choices, all 5 would be used greatly, and sometimes having too many choices leads to nothing being accomplished, no one being happy, and the medium of which the choice is being utilized dying. Now, all that was an allegory for channels. For simplicity's sake, we'll call a repeater a channel. It's a different frequency than simplex or radio to radio, so we'll call it a different channel. When you take 100 channels, you'll find that some people are scanning and listening, but they aren't calling out for a fear of missing out. They're worried that they're going to miss the perfect call out to respond to. So we go and make it 10 channels. People are still scanning, but there's people talking as they're more likely to hear someone else on the line. We see this in GMRS. There's 8 repeater frequencies allowed to be used, almost always in use. So let's go deeper. Let's take the channels from a 30 count, or GMRS, to a new imaginary service that takes GMRS's place. This service has 5 channels. Channel 1 for extremely low power transmissions, such as parents and kids in the park. Power as low as 1/4 of a watt. Channel 2 is for low power transmissions up to 5 watts, and Channel 3 for medium power up to 50 watts, and Channel 4 for high power transmissions up to 200 watts. And finally, the 5th channel, a repeater channel that is available for recreational activities, general talking, and secondary communications. For people wondering about emergency communications, it would also be on the repeater channel. To utilize it for emergencies, just like any other radio, you break in and say, emergency or priority. Now, for UHF, power doesn't always mean you'll get further, but it will if you go from 1/4 watt to 200 watts. Under this idea, 80% of the channels were simplex, short distance comms to make do, but that's what you want. If you want to talk far, use the repeater. If you want to talk within half a mile, use channel 1. And if you want to talk to someone as far as the horizon, use channel 4. Some people would be annoyed at the fact that they don't get to constantly talk on the repeater without others getting annoyed that they don't also get to talk, but if that's the case, utilize a high power simplex channel. The biggest con towards the singular repeater is the effect of jamming. Repeater jamming is not new or uncommon problems in radio. Unfortunately, this would happen, but it would also become a greater habit to track down and prove whoever is jamming, aka using the cracking SDR to find the person. There'd be no other repeater channels they can switch to when they're scared of being found, as they always have the deterrent of being caught. The FCC would actually care more about repeaters being jammed, as they could no longer just say, well, switch to a different repeater. The way I see this happening in radio is to keep these 5 channels across the spectrum, for different bands to have 5 different channels to work with the exception of 40 meter and 20 meter. I'll now briefly list all the bands that I see happening and the channels and the power that goes with them. Starting with the lowest usable frequency, 40 meter. 40 meters would contain 3 channels, channel 1 being 1 watt. Very low power transmissions, but you're using as little as you can. Channel 2 being 10 watts. And then channel 3 being a maximum of 100 watts for emergency use only. It would be very similar for 20 meters as we move forward into the spectrum. It having 3 channels, 1 being 1 watt, 2 being 10 watts, and 3 being 100 watts maximum for emergency use only. We move further in, going to 11 meters, or as a lot of people call it, the CB band, going from 40 channels down to 5 channels. Channel 1 being 1 watt, like before, channel 2 being 5 watts, channel 3 being 50, channel 4 being 200, and then channel 5 being a repeater, very similar to GMRS, or even the repeaters that you see on the 10 meter FM spectrum. Then we move further, 6 meter, 5 channels, channel 1, 1 watt, channel 2, 5 watts, channel 3, 50 watts, channel 4, 200 watts, and channel 5 being a repeater. Moving further, we go down to 2 meters, 5 channels, the first channel being 1/4 of a watt, channel 2 being 5 watts, channel 3 being 50 watts, channel 4 being 200 watts, and channel 5 becoming the repeater. 70 centimeter being very similar, 5 channels, first one being 1/4 of a watt, second one being 5 watts, third one being 50 watts, fourth one being 200 watt maximum, and 5 being the repeater. And then we move down to 33 centimeters, or the 900 megahertz band, once again doing the 5 channels, 1 being 1/4 of a watt, 2 being 5, 3 being 50, and 4 being 200. We see this already in amateur radio. Why not go ahead and put it into a license-free radio? Especially after 33 centimeters or 900 megahertz, we don't really see a big change of how radio waves travel. Realistically, between 70 centimeter and 33 centimeter, waves don't propagate very differently. They do to the slightest extent, with tropospheric ducting being more likely in the 70 centimeter band compared to 33, and even the 2 meter is similar to 70 centimeter, with just ducting and sporadic E being more common than 70 centimeters. 6 meter is definitely where we begin to see big changes in the waves propagate in different ways. This provides reasons why we should allow separate bands for CB usage. Different bands allow different propagation, 40 and 20 meters being useful for nighttime propagation, 11 being useful for daytime, 6 meters being useful for all-around mid-range frequencies, and 2 meters and up being useful for short-range clear communications. Unfortunately, due to bandwidth usage, I think that we would only be able to continue to use single sideband and AM on the HF bands. I'm aware FM exists on them, but assuming the channels need to be close together, the bandwidth would just be too much. This isn't an issue for 6 meters and above due to the availability of more bandwidth and space, so in my model, I imagine that 6 meter could use FM and 11 meter and down could use AM single sideband. And for the sideband being the lower sideband, as the ham radio community likes to use upper sideband. And it could lead to less confusion and not only use a different frequency, but a different side of it in the first place. I also believe that the existence of high-power channels would decrease the interference of the lesser channels. People looking for faraway contacts are going to go to the higher power channels, point blank. I'm aware that people will do what they want and run power where they want, like they already do in the current state of 11 meter CB band, but that has a limit. The same 4 watts across the band and 12 for single sideband. But people decide to keep the max power in the bottom 6 and top 6 channels for the most part, and I guarantee that if the FCC caved in and allowed massive power on just 2 of those channels, interference on the rest of the channels would die down. All in all, having channelized frequencies based on power would ultimately end unexpected interference and uncomplicate the contacting structure of radio. Point being, the further you want to talk, the higher the channel you go. Emergency channels. Ultimately, This would also make emergency calls quick to hear, easy to transmit, and easy to decipher. The use of a singular repeater would eliminate the need for emergency simplex calls and provide better response. In emergencies, all callouts should go through 911 on your phone, but cell service is not always a given. But in a channelized system, whether someone is rapidly scanning past the 5 frequencies or someone dedicated their time to the repeater, you will be heard. This even goes for the HF bands too, except for it'd be different that it'd be 100% simplex, with exception to 11 meters. But with the way that the waves propagate, this shouldn't be an issue. The main point of having an emergency radio on 40 meter or 20 meter would be long distance calls. Exceptionally during the night, and for 11 meter during the solar cycle, it would be great too. Having these channelized frequencies increases the chance you'll be heard, well, infinitely. Many hams claim to be so due to wanting radios to prepare to communicate with others when the world ends, but who's going to say anyone is going to be using the same frequency? When you have channels, you have people on the same frequency. It's the same reason that if there's an emergency, it's vital to have a NOAA weather radio with 7 channels on you. Everyone will go to those frequencies to listen in, and not everyone has an SDR. And not everyone listens to 146.52 megahertz. Sure, me and you might know that MERS 3 is 151.94 megahertz, but to the average person, it could just be 2 meter channel 3. General talk. As for non-emergency general talk, while amateur radio may be better for radio theory and talking amongst the community heavily involved in the subjects regarding radio, having channelized simplex frequencies also allows for people to talk amongst each other in the community about fun topics. This can range from sports, the weather, TV shows, or literally anything else, including just like ham radio, radio theory. And just like ham radio, nobody would have priority over someone else on a frequency, or in other words, channel. This opens up a world for relaxation and communication previously not obtained. Prior to this, the radio world usually insisted on talking about itself. What antenna are you using? Are you using 1 or 2 watts? What rig are you using? But now it's open to the public for realistically any conversation. Especially since those who want to talk physically close up people just use channel 1, and those who want to talk to people in their neighborhood talk on channel 2, people who want to talk for miles use channel 3, and long distance contacts are on channel 4. And channel 5 is countywide, if not more. This also connects a community more than before. It is seen in today's GMRS world where entire communities will depend on a mountain repeater due to there being no cell service, and benefiting from the community coming together to provide access towards a repeater for all. People can listen in and people can join in. This leads to people being friendly again, hearing people that they haven't thought twice about since meeting, if they ever met. QSOs. If you're looking for contacts, then this is still the way for you. While part of the amateur world is fishing for that contact you never thought you'd make, and the use of SDRs has made this much easier and made people just listen to similar parts of the band, just like channelized radio. With realistically 4 channels to make contacts with, and 2 of them being too low power to really work with, you've boiled down the process to 2 channels, one of which could have more people talking. It becomes clear how much easier it is to make these contacts. And you wouldn't need a signifier, you wouldn't need a call. It would be you from your area, that's it. And if you're not into making contacts and you're just interested in talking to family, stay on channel 1 and 2. If you need the extra power, it's always there. Or there's an entire separate band for different propagation, such as switching from 70 centimeters to 2 meters. While propagation is similar, it isn't exact, and you would get rid of the noise from the other 70 centimeter channel. In turn, it would allow people with very little radio knowledge on how waves travel on certain frequencies, should they feel they need or want to learn, letting them get into ham radio and begin experimenting with antennas, amplifiers, and solar cycles. Why amateur radio is better at experimenting. So, you've just listened to me for the past 20 minutes or more talk about why these channels would be beneficial to the radio hobby and communications as a whole, and I stand by that. And some people might look at that and think, I don't like ham radio, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I am a licensed operator on ham radio. I enjoy the physics and talking about antennas and models of radios and modes of operation and power maxes and minimums, and plus talking about the minimum and maximum frequencies being able to be used to find that sweet spot of clear communications coupled with the distance transmitted, talking about radiation powers of Yagi antennas versus omnidirectional antennas, etc., etc. Only then do frequency ranges make sense. Moving away from certain frequencies to not bother others in your experimenting, whether with another person previously set up or with online propagation checkers, seeing how your waves are working, not to mention this is the perfect opportunity to try new modes and see how they work. While I stated earlier that channelized bands would be standardized into being single sideband for HF and FM for VHF UHF, amateur radio is the perfect time to attempt to change your modes. You can see how the bandwidth of the transmission changes the distance or power of your call. You can see how CW affects the air different than AM or digital or any other mode that matters. You can test out whether or not you can hear yourself on the Yagi antenna and beam it at yourself. Turn that power up and put some fire in that wire. Amateur radio would be the way you further your radio knowledge and become more professionally informed about the waves you're sending over the air during your escapades on channelized CB. It would make it to when people on channelized CB don't understand why their propagation isn't working, you can help them understand their issue. You can become an idol in the community for understanding the concepts and helping produce better results for those attempting to talk to family or friends. Why CB and GMRS are still used today. If you think that the channelized frequencies would die out quickly, let me throw two radio services that are still used to this day, both of which originating more than 60 years ago. Citezen Band and the General Mobile Radio Service, shortened down to and better known as CB and GMRS. We'll start with CB, as it's not only been around a bit longer, but it's more widely used and for the most part is still used more to this day. CB is a 40-channel service that is used mainly by truckers in the North American region, including Mexico and Canada. This band sits in the 27 megahertz range and is commonly associated with people who want to talk long distances but don't want to take or use the ham portions of the bands. There seems to be some freedom many people associate with CB radio, whether this is illegal activities or just harmless talking. People still use the service and continue to buy products for it to this day. It uses AM modulation due to longer range and being able to hear multiple people within one channel. While FM is available on CB, it isn't common. CT/CSS tones are also not a thing in CB. Everyone hears everyone, making it alluring to those who want to be heard. CB has engraved itself in trucker travel culture in North America and even made its way into work sites such as construction and taxi services. If there's one thing to take from CB, it's that some people will choose distance over sound quality. Now, GMRS, a 22/30 channel service meant for slightly shorter communication with wideband FM, sounding crystal clean sitting at 462 megahertz. This band also offers repeaters and unlike CB, uses CT/CSS tones to block out and stop interference. GMRS became big due to the ease of licensing and crystal clear communicating, at least compared to CB. Now, instead of asking people to repeat 6 or 7 times, we heard the short two-way communication the first time. GMRS quickly became associated with backpacking, off-roading, and camping due to its effectiveness. GMRS also has the bonus of being linked to the FRS or Family Radio Service. Sharing frequencies meant two services could finally talk to each other without offsets. It also meant that we could see a surge in handheld radios. CB radios, as we know them today, can't effectively use handheld radios. The amount of parts placed inside the handheld becomes too much, and the length of the wave is so long that the antenna becomes too long to effectively use in everyday life, with the exception of expensive folding antennas. Not GMRS though. Packing 5 watts instead of 4 and clear FM communication, it broke the handheld barrier. CB radios, as we know them today, can't effectively use handheld radios. The amount of parts placed inside the handheld becomes too much, and the length of the wave is so long that the antenna becomes too long to effectively use in everyday life, with the exception of expensive folding antennas. Not GMRS though. Packing 5 watts instead of 4 and clear FM communication, it broke the handheld barrier. GMRS could effectively pack the parts of their units into something smaller than a phone and have an antenna smaller than a finger, while still providing clear communications. This is also something we see in a similar service called MURS, or the Multi-Use Radio Service. And these are the basis of channelized radios. People still use these radios for their simplicity, ease of use, ease of understanding, and the lack of needing a tested license to partake in communications. GMRS even uses repeaters upwards of 100 miles. The ideas of channeling the frequencies allowed people to talk to family counties away and still be connected. If we can do that with 22 simplex frequencies and 8 repeater channels, Imagine what we could do with 4 simplex frequencies in one repeater. People use these bands for fun, such as recreational activities, hunting, off-roading, etc. Some even use it for relaxing and conversation when it isn't private. Some of these use these bands to make distant contacts and push the limits of their allotted power. Some people enjoy the technology, and some people just use it for emergencies when there's no service. In a channelized model, all of this is possible, while keeping it even more simplified. Why different bands for channelized CB? In the model I discussed, I'm not saying that we should sit right next to amateur bands. I'm simply saying that we make some form of similar propagation radios with a free service that allows long-distance communications. For these examples, I will give the few, but not limited to, frequencies I associated with the channeled CB, starting from the lowest frequencies, heading to the highest. 40 meters, a great nighttime propagation tool. Talking in single sideband in this range is guaranteed to have you hit someone somewhere. And 20 meters, just like 40 meters, nighttime propagation is key. Although bouncing differently, it is similar in spirit to the 40 meters using single sideband. 3. 11 meters. Using in AM mode and the sunspot activity, this is a good long-distance communication mode during the day, although during the night these waves would obviously die down just like you see in 11 meter CB today. Number 4, 6 meter. The end of waves regularly bouncing off the atmosphere but still in AM mode. We're experiencing the last long-distance frequency in the list. 5, 2 meters. Taking a note from MURS, or the Multi-Use Radio Service, this is a medium-distance communication tool that can use FM for clear voice communication. The beginning to clearer and clearer comms. 6. 70 centimeters. Taking inspiration from GMRS, the 70 centimeter would use FM and follow the trend of sounding even clearer while now becoming short-range communications. And 7. 33 to 13 centimeters. Obviously taking notes from the open and ham radio bands, these are the shortest communications in the band. Not getting out very far, they would definitely sound the best in general. People would be in this range definitely want clear communications while sacrificing distance. And my final point, channels would make radio less lonely. Radio is all about talking to people, and there's something a little strange and lonely when you scan the band and hear literally nothing. Sure, in ham radio, when you hear someone, it's almost a magical moment, but it shouldn't be. It should be expected. It is a radio. I mean, seriously, who wants to be the guy mad at everyone for talking on the radio? Those are the grumpy 70-year-old divorced men sitting in their basement waiting for the perfect ham call they'll never hear. The people that whenever you ask if the frequency is in use, they get angry and say, "Get off my band." Radio is meant to be heard. It's meant to be talked on, and it's meant to be fun and a secondary communication device. Spreading people further apart will never make people enjoy the hobby. It'll only further kill an already dying hobby. I wish people would realize communications is a two-way street. I appreciate everyone for listening in, by the way, and watching this video, and it's a little different than what I usually do. If you have any thoughts on what I said, let me know in the comments. 7-3, sayonara, see ya, whatever you prefer. I just appreciate you for tuning in and finally listening to me. This is also the first video I've ever showed my face in, and you know that if you follow my TikTok. I think I'm at 36,700 followers now, and I greatly appreciate it. I know YouTube is my secondary communication device, but it's definitely a different medium. I might start uploading to YouTube just a little bit more here and there, but I'll definitely still be on TikTok more. So make sure you go to my Instagram on the Trail Radio, go to my TikTok on the Trail Radio, and you can always subscribe or do anything you want on here. Appreciate you taking the time to listen in. On the Trail Radio, out, 7-3s.